Hi. Today's topic that we're going to discuss is character. Now, character is one of the most important aspects of a story. It can make or break your story, honestly. If your character is not relatable, then obviously the reader is not going to be able to relate to the story. As you saw in the lesson, we talked a little bit about Huckleberry Finn. We talked about creating characters that were believable. So today we're just going to kind of go through that, discuss that a little bit, and talk about the different aspects of why that is so important. Okay, so let's start out with the idea of a believable character. Obviously, we're human. We're individuals who have stories, we've experienced things. If you create a character who doesn't seem like they've experienced life, then the reader's not going to be able to relate. Keep in mind that as adult writers, we're writing for an adult audience. So if we're writing a story, let's say a children's fairy tale, it's obviously not going to be as complex as what we would create for an adult, for middle school, for high school, anyone who's really experienced life a little bit. So let's take a story like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, okay? So in this story, we have four different characters. Obviously, Goldilocks is the most relatable. Not only is she human, but she actually has to go through some different trials that, as a child, someone can relate to. Okay? She has to decide what will make her happy. She has to kind of figure out by trying out different things what's going to work best for her. Okay? As an adult character, we're going to need something a little more complex. This is where we run into things like when we were talking about Huckleberry Finn. Huck Finn obviously has to experience a little bit more in life. While he is also making decisions based on what's correct for him, it's a little more complicated and it's a little bit deeper than something that we would experience with, like I said before, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. We're not relating to children here, we're relating to adults. So something that Huck Finn has to deal with is racism. And that's part of the selection that I've included for you for this lesson. It's where he's friends with Jim. Jim is an African-American man during a time when it was not appropriate to be friends with someone of a different skin color from you. So while this can be compared to a character such as Goldilocks, who has to make decisions for herself and is forced to figure out if something is a little too far one way or too far the other way for her, and then figure out what's just right, Huck actually ends up being a little too far one way for what most people during his time period would think. Okay? So this is a statement that was being made by Mark Twain at the time by creating a character who is both relatable because he's deciding to be friends with someone that society is shunning, and creating a relationship that society would otherwise say is inappropriate, especially for a man of his age and especially for a young white man of his age. While he is making these decisions, it is a far deeper character. So keep in mind when you are creating your character that it has to be somebody who's more relatable. I know I keep stressing that, but it is extremely important. If you create a character who's not relatable, then your reader will not be able to understand the story. Okay, so keep in mind, a lot of stories, well, yes, we may create science fiction or we may create something that is a little more far-fetched. There's still that human aspect to the character. Now, the assignment that I had you do for this practice was working with a magazine. So you had to pick out a magazine, you had to find a picture of an individual, name the character, come up with a background for them, come up with a story. So just as an example, let's say I'm flipping through a magazine and I find a model. I would come up with a name for her. I might say her name is Olivia, and I might say that she has a very torrid past, but she has found love, and now she's in this fantastic perfume commercial where everything behind her is very decadent and everything is covered in gold because she is now hanging out with upper society. So by looking at a picture like this, I can create this entire character. I create this entire backstory. This is also something fun that we like to do when we say we are people watching, or people watching. So we go out into a crowd and we might look at different people and say, oh my goodness, look at that person. Look at how they're dressed. Look at how she walks. Look at the way that he just looked at that other individual. Okay, we come up with backstories for everyone around us. So when creating a character, this is no different. A lot of times authors like to create characters based off of individuals they already know. This obviously will make the character far more relatable because it is based on a real person. So what you need to keep in mind is that as humans, as individuals, as intellectual thinking adults, we do have backgrounds that a lot of people might not be aware of. That's something that needs to come in with your character as well. While there is a lot that you're going to talk about with your character in your piece, you may not reveal everything. Keep in mind that also we don't really like to go into a social situation saying, hi, I went through this in my life. Say your character was in the army. There's a lot that your character might not want to talk about. There are some other things that your character might have gone through a lot of abuse as a child. That's something that your character may not want to talk about, but that is going to add another layer to your character. We have to keep in mind also that, let's say we're creating a character who's in high school. There's a lot that's going on there, okay? So your character might have a crush on a teacher, or your character might decide that they no longer want to dress like the other cheerleaders or something along those lines. There's a reason for that. There is a reason why your character has that crush on that teacher. There's a reason why your character as a high school student no longer wants to dress like everyone else. There's a turning point. So that's something else that you need to keep in mind when you are developing your character, that the plot is extremely important. Therefore, you need to keep your character's conscience in mind, as well as the decisions that your character might make. If you try to force a situation just as you wouldn't do with a human being, then the reaction may not be what you desire from your character, but it might also, you know, give you a reaction that you don't really want, or it might not seem like something that your character would do. Okay, so let's take, for example, we'll stereotype a little bit just to make it a little easier. Let's take, for example, the head cheerleader. Let's say we're creating a character where she is head cheerleader, she's blonde, and she's gorgeous, and she's popular, and everything is fantastic. Now, let's place this character in a situation that makes sense for a high schooler. Let's put her in a party situation, okay? So, we put her in this party situation. She's popular, she's making friends with everyone knows her, and somebody offers her a beer. Now, she's in high school, she's head cheerleader. Does she accept the beer? Maybe. It depends on the background for your character, okay? This is a believable situation where you probably don't have to force a reaction. You don't have to force something that seems unnatural for her. However, if you place her in a situation where, let's say, she's suddenly getting on a spaceship because she was offered some weird ride or something from someone who's famous, this is a very far-fetched situation where this character would probably not find herself. Okay? So while it is very fun to think about, and while it is something that you may want to do thinking about your character and sitting down and really developing them and saying, what if I put them in this crazy situation? How would my character react? What would they think? That's fantastic, but it may not work for the piece exactly. So keep in mind the believability, keep in mind the relatability of your character and the situations in which you place them. Okay, let's review Huck Finn again, the section that you were reading through. So obviously he's having an adventure with Jim. Not only do we learn a lot about Huck through this, but we learn a lot about Jim. Jim is a secondary character. So while he's not quite as important in this situation as Huck, we still get to learn quite a bit about him. And we also get to learn a lot about Huck through Jim. Okay? So Secondary characters are something else that we have to keep in mind. Jim is an extremely believable character because during that time he is speaking and he is reacting in manners that were appropriate for both his race and the relationship that he, like I said before, should not be having with young Huck. However, he is still having this relationship. So the way that he treats him is very much the way that he should be treating him. The way that Huck is treating Jim, however, is not the way that society thinks that he should be treating him. However, since Huck has grown, since Huck has experienced quite a bit in his life, he's making his own decisions. So the story becomes extremely understandable and extremely believable due to what we do know about Huck. Watching him with the widow, listening to the widow talk about how she would like to pray for him and how she always feels so bad for his soul. So that gives you another perspective of Huck. So, just a quick review. Whenever we're creating a character, we want to keep in mind that they need to be extremely believable. They need to be relatable. We as adults and as intellectual individuals are looking at the character, trying to find a way to connect. This is an extremely important part of your story because even if the plot is amazing, if we can't relate to the characters, then there's really no way that we can relate to the story. Okay? So, for the next section, we're going to start talking about plot.